They'd come to trade or find fortune in a city that offered greater opportunities than they'd had back home. It rankled that so many came here, to Çeda's home, and lived off it like fleas on a dog, though she could hardly complain. A boy in a teal kaftan pointed to Çeda wildly and called, "The White Wolf! The wolf has come to fight!" And the crowd rose to their feet as one, craning their necks to see. The pits paid well enough. A ragged cheer went up as she strode to the centre of the pit and joined the circle of 11 other fighters. The money men in the stands began calling out odds for the White Wolf. She hadn't even been chosen to fight yet, so no one would know who her opponent would be, but many still flocked to be the first to wager their coin on her. The other dirt dogs watched Çeda warily. Some knew her, but just like those in the audience, many of these fighters had come from distant kingdoms to try their hand against the best fighters in Sharakhai. 3 women stood among those gathered, 2 well-muscled, the third an absolute brute. She outweighed Çeda by 3 stone at least. The rest were men, some brawny, others lithe. One, however, was a tower of a man, wearing a beaten leather breastplate and a conical helm with chainmail that lapped against his broad shoulders. Haluk. He stood a full head and a half taller than Çeda and stared at her like an ox, readying a charge. In response, Çeda strode toward him and pressed her thumb to an exposed edge on the back of her mailed gloves. She pressed hard enough to pierce skin, to draw blood. Haluk stared at her with confusion, then a wicked sort of glee, as Çeda stopped in front of him and pressed her bloody thumb to the centre of his leather breastplate. The crowd roared. A new flurry of betting rose, while the rest of the audience jockeyed for position against the rim of the pit. Çeda had just marked Haluk for her own, an ancient gesture that not all dirt dogs would respect, but these would, she reckoned. None of them would wish to fight Haluk, not in their first bout of the day. When Çeda turned away and returned to her place in the circle, all but ignoring Haluk, the naked anger on his face was slowly replaced with a look of cool assessment. Good, Çeda thought. He'd taken the bait, and would surely choose her if she didn't choose him first. When some but not all of the betting flurry had died down, Pelham stepped out from another darkened tunnel. The calls of betting rose to a tumult as the audience saw the first bout was ready to begin. Pelham wore a jewelled vest, a brown kufi, and a red kaftan that was not only fashionable but fine save for its hem, which was hopelessly dusty from its days sweeping the pit floors. In one of Pelham's skeletal hands he held a woven basket. As the fighters parted for him, he stepped to the rough centre of their circle and flipped the basket lid open. After one last check around him to ensure all was ready, he shot his hand into the basket's confines and lifted a horned viper as long as his lanky legs. The snake wriggled, swelling its hood and hissing, baring its fangs for all to see. Pelham knew his business, but the snake made Çeda's hackles rise. Fights were rare, but not unheard of, especially if one of the fighters was inexperienced and jumped when the snake drew near. Çeda knew enough to remain still, but foreigners didn't always follow Pelham's careful pre-bout instructions, and it wasn't always the person who jumped that the snakes chose to sink their fangs into. As Pelham held the writhing snake, each of the fighters spread their legs wide until their sandaled or booted feet butted up against each other's. After a glance at each of the fighters' stances and finding them proper, Pelham dropped the snake and stepped away. It lay there, coiling itself tightly. The crowd shouted to the baked desert air.